In what was supposed to be a warm family dinner, I caught my wife's stepson secretly pouring a strange powder into my wine, and the hatred in his eyes made my blood run cold. I stayed quiet, watching every move. Then I switched the glasses to test him. Minutes later, my wife took a sip and suddenly collapsed, turning pale as everyone screamed and an ambulance was called. Was this an accident or a murder attempt? Subscribe now so you don't miss the shocking twist in the next part. The powder fell like a careless pinch of salt. I saw it because Varrick's hand hovered too long over the wine glass, and because the ring light on the sideboard made everything shine too bright, like a stage. His fingers shook once, just enough to scatter the white grains. Then he pulled back and aimed a smile at the phone on a tripod. My wife's stepson wasn't clumsy. He was careful. And when he lifted his eyes to me, the hatred in them turned my stomach cold. The way the powder disappeared into the wine, too fast, too clean, killed every comforting thought. I didn't shout. I didn't reach for the glass. With a job that depends on staying calm when other people panic, I'd learned the loud move is usually the wrong move. If I was wrong, I'd be the paranoid husband who ruined dinner. If I was right, I was sitting in a house where someone wanted me gone. I stayed quiet and watched. Evangeline walked in from the kitchen with her perfect smile and her hair pinned back, as if tonight mattered more than it should. The house smelled like rosemary and roast meat, comfort on paper. In my chest, it felt like cover. "Everyone ready?" she asked, looking at Varrick first, then at me, quick, like checking a box. "Let's make this nice. Make this nice. Perform it." Varrick tapped his screen. The ring light brightened. "We're rolling," he announced, half joking, half serious. "Family dinner, no drama." His eyes flicked to me on that last word. Evangeline came behind my chair and squeezed my shoulder. It should have felt loving. It felt like a warning. "Gideon," she murmured, low enough that the camera wouldn't catch it. "Please, don't embarrass us." Us, as if I was the risk. "I'm not planning to," I said. My voice sounded steady. My pulse didn't. The table looked like a magazine shoot. Cloth napkins folded sharp. Candles lit just right, and in front of every seat sat an elegant name card in gold lettering. I found mine last. Plain white cardstock, bold black stamp. Guest. Heat climbed my throat. Evangeline stared at the candles. Varrick's mouth twitched. No one corrected it. No one laughed. That was the point. I picked the card up, flipped it face down, and pressed my thumb into the edge until it creased. Not enough to tear it, just enough to leave proof I'd touched it. Inside, something went quiet, because I wasn't a guest. I was the man who paid bills on time. The man who fixed the furnace, replaced the fence panels, showed up when her family needed rides and help and quiet patience. And yet here I was, labeled like background. Varrick raised the wine glass, the one he'd powdered. "To family," he said, smooth as polished glass. Evangeline lifted hers. "To family." I lifted my water and nodded. I didn't drink wine tonight. Not until I knew what was in it. I watched the red liquid catch the ring light and glow like something expensive. I watched Varrick's eyes check the glass like he was tracking a countdown. Then he'd flash the camera a bright smile. Then back to the glass, then to me. "So Gideon," he said, polite in the way people are polite when they're cruel. "Still crawling around in people's attics for a living?" I met his gaze. "Still keeping folks warm," I said. Evangeline's napkin twisted in her hands. She wasn't eating much. She kept smoothing the same spot on the tablecloth, like she could flatten what was coming. I wanted to believe she didn't know. I wanted that badly. But I'd seen enough in life to understand how often people look away when choosing sides feels dangerous. I kept my expression neutral, eating slowly like my heart wasn't thudding in my ears. When Evangeline stood to refill the water pitcher, Varrick subtly slid the wine glass closer to the center, guarding it like treasure. That told me everything. I stood. "I'm going to grab the pepper," I said casually. Evangeline nodded without thinking. I moved like I move on a job site. Smooth, no wasted motion. My right hand reached for the pepper grinder near Evangeline's plate. My left hand steadied the table edge, and in that quiet second, I switched the glasses. Varrick's prepared wine glass slid into Evangeline's place. Evangeline's glass slid into Varrick's spot. 2 inches. A natural motion. If you weren't watching for it, you'd never see it. I sat back down and forced myself to breathe. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth. Varrick glanced down. His smile locked for a heartbeat, just long enough. Then he recovered too fast and started talking louder, filling the air like noise could patch a leak. Evangeline lifted her glass a moment later. She took a sip like she was proving everything was fine for the camera. Time slowed. Her swallow caught. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face so fast it looked unreal. Then her body tipped, heavy and sudden, her shoulder hitting the chair before she slid to the floor. The glass rolled, wine spreading across the tablecloth like a dark bruise. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. Varric shot up, phone in his hand, already filming, already performing. "Mom! Mom!" he shouted. "Call 911!" I dropped beside Evangeline, my hands steady even as my brain screamed. I checked her breathing. I called her name. I heard a calm dispatcher on speaker. Outside, sirens cut through the rain and grew louder. I looked up at Varric. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was watching the camera screen, adjusting his face into the perfect kind of shock. Then he leaned toward me, close enough that only I could hear, and whispered, soft and steady, "You should have stayed a guest." The sirens were getting closer, and Varric leaned toward me and whispered something that made my stomach drop. "You just ruined everything," he said, peppermint gum on his breath. No fear in his eyes, only annoyance, like his plan had been interrupted. I stayed still. Panic makes mistakes. The front door opened and 2 paramedics rushed in. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" one of them asked, already checking Evangeline's pulse. She took a sip of wine and I started. Varric cut in smoothly. "He's kind of confused," he told them. "He's been stressed. He's overreacting." My wife was pale, barely responsive, and he was already building a story. He held his phone up, filming. "My mom just collapsed," he said into the camera, voice trembling on command. "My stepdad is freaking out." Stepdad, never husband. A paramedic started asking questions, but Varric stepped closer. "She's healthy," he said quickly. "She just works too much. She's been under pressure." The words sounded caring, but his eyes kept flicking to the screen, checking his own angle. Evangeline's eyelids fluttered. I reached for her hand. "Evie, I'm here. You're safe." For a second, her fingers squeezed mine. Then her eyes drifted toward her son, and she whispered, weak and automatic, "Gideon, please, don't make a scene." Even now, her first instinct was to protect his image. I kept my voice gentle. "I won't," I said. "Just breathe." But inside, something turned cold and clear. If I didn't protect myself, no one in this room would. The paramedic asked, "What did she drink tonight?" Varric answered like a practiced spokesperson. "Just dinner. We had a toast. Everything was normal." A toast. The same polished performance I'd seen at the table. Public charm, private contempt. Then the doorbell rang again. Mrs. Verity Caldwell stood in the doorway, eyes wide. She looked at Varric, then at me. "That boy's eyes. Something isn't right," she murmured. I turned to the paramedic, careful with my tone. "I need you to document that glass," I said, pointing to the wine glass on the table. "Please, that's important." Varric laughed, too loud, too sharp. "He's paranoid," he said. "He watches too much TV." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the paramedic. "Call me whatever you want," I said quietly. "I'd rather be alive." While they focused on Evangeline, I wrapped the glass in a towel and sealed it in a zip-top bag. Varric stepped close, dropping his sweet voice. "What are you doing?" "Making sure the facts don't disappear," I said. He didn't grab it. Not with the paramedics there, not with Mrs. Verity watching. So he backed off, lifted his phone again, and put his shocked son face right back on. They loaded Evangeline onto the stretcher. Rain misted the driveway. I walked beside her, jaw locked, thinking 3 moves ahead. I stepped off the porch and called 911 again. 911, what's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. "My wife collapsed," I said. "Paramedics are transporting her, but I need to report something else." "A report about what, sir?" I looked through the window. Varric was still filming, still performing. "I believe this was intentional," I said. The dispatcher paused. "Sir, are you saying you believe someone tried to poison your wife?" I stared at that window, at that calm face. "Yes," I said, "and I think the person who meant to harm me is still in that house." When the dispatcher asked me to name who I suspected, I realized the truth was older than tonight. And it started long before that dinner table. The dispatcher didn't push me. She didn't rush me either. Her voice stayed steady, like she'd learned a long time ago that panic doesn't help anyone. "Sir," she said, "who do you believe is responsible?" I stood under the porch light with the cold biting at my ears. My breath floated out in short white clouds. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice low, quiet enough that Varric couldn't hear me from inside. "My wife's son," I said, "Varric." There was a pause on the line, not doubt, just the weight of what I'd said. "And you're telling me you have reason," she replied. "Yes." I looked down at the plastic bag with the towel-wrapped glass inside. "I have evidence. I need it documented. I don't want it to disappear. I don't want this turned into a story about me being confused." "Do not re-enter the home alone," she said. "Stay visible. Officers are en route. Keep the item secure. If possible, do not handle it further." I swallowed hard. Once you say a name like that, the family story changes forever. You don't go back to small talk and polite holidays. You don't go back to pretending. I ended the call and stared at the screen on my phone for a moment, as if it might suddenly tell me how to rewind time. Instead, my thumb drifted to something I hadn't listened to in weeks, a saved voicemail. I didn't press play for the whole thing. I didn't need to. I only needed the one line, the one that had kept me quiet, kept me trying, kept me showing up even when I knew I was being treated like furniture. "Hold your ground, son," my father's voice had said. "Do the right thing. People notice more than you think." My dad, Percival, used to call me son like it was a promise. I was the youngest in my family, the one expected to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to be steady when everyone else got loud. I'd spent most of my life believing that if I stayed patient long enough, I'd eventually be treated like family wherever I landed, even in Evangeline's house. I stared at the voicemail the way some people rub a worry stone. The screen light reflected off my wedding band. I had worn that ring through layoffs, through hospital visits, through the kind of days where you come home exhausted and still make sure someone else eats first. And still, at that table tonight, I'd been labeled a guest. That wasn't the first time Varric had tried to erase me. 6 months ago, we'd been in the kitchen after church, still smelling like coffee and cinnamon rolls from the fellowship hall. Evangeline had her coat half on, and Varric was already waving his phone around like a director. "Family pic," he'd said, cheerful and loud. "Come on, Mom." I stood right there, 2 feet away, holding the casserole dish I'd carried in. I leaned in without thinking. That's what husbands do. That's what family does. Later that evening, I opened my phone and saw his story. Real family. Evangeline. Varric. A clean, bright photo. And the edge of my shoulder, cropped out like an accident that didn't feel accidental. Comments poured in from church friends and neighbors. "Beautiful family. Look at you two. So proud of your boy." I remember staring at that post while standing in the same kitchen where the picture was taken. My face wasn't on the screen, but my life was all over that house. My tools in the garage, my paycheck paying the mortgage, my hands fixing the heater when it went out. Evangeline saw my expression and sighed, tired, like I was the one creating trouble. "He didn't mean anything by it," she'd said, but Varric had looked at me then, just for a second, and his eyes had said something different. "You're not part of this." I didn't argue. I told myself it was social media nonsense. I told myself I was too grown to care, but it was never just a post. It was a declaration. Another memory followed, sharper than the rest. A FedEx envelope on the counter one afternoon, the kind that makes your stomach tighten, even when you don't know why. Evangeline had walked in, saw it, and moved too fast, like she wanted it gone before I could read the label. Varric had been on the phone in the living room, voice casual, almost bored. "He signs next week," he'd said. "Yeah, next week." Evangeline's head snapped toward him, and she hissed under her breath, "Not now." I'd asked later, calm, like a man who doesn't want to fight. "Signs what?" She'd forced a smile and kissed my cheek. "Just paperwork for his future. Don't worry about it." But my mind had never stopped circling that sentence. He signs next week. Not we sign. Not I sign. He. That's when the pieces began to click into place, right there under the porch light with sirens fading down the street. This wasn't only about disrespect, it was about control. It was about paperwork, money, and who gets to decide what happens to a house, a marriage, and a man who thought he'd earned his place. My fingers felt stiff from the cold. I did what a grown man does when he's in danger and doesn't want to make it worse. I called someone who wouldn't get emotional. Merrick answered on the second ring. "You okay?" he asked, voice rough with sleep but instantly alert. "Merrick," I said, "I need you to listen carefully. Something happened tonight." Evangeline collapsed. I think Varick tampered with a drink. There was no dramatic gasp on his end, no long speech, only a quiet, practical pause. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Outside the house. I have the glass sealed up." "Good," he said. "Don't go back in alone. Don't argue. Write down everything you remember. Times, exact words, who saw what. If they're building a story, you build proof." I looked around and found a crumpled receipt in my coat pocket. With a pen that barely worked in the damp cold, I started writing on the back. Time, what I saw, what was said, who was present. My handwriting shook at first, then steadied as my focus narrowed. Merrick stayed on the line. "Gideon," he said, "you're not crazy, you're not weak, but you have to be smart. The first thing they'll do is make you look unstable." I swallowed. He already did. He told the paramedics I was confused. "Then you don't give him a moment he can twist," Merrick said. "You stay calm. You stay factual. You let the system see you the way you really are." I ended the call and stared at the house. Some families don't yell. They erase you. Then they call it love. I'd spent months letting it happen, letting Varick crop me out, dismiss me, reduce me to a background character in my own marriage. Tonight, that pattern had crossed a line that couldn't be smoothed over with patience. I wasn't going to be erased by a camera. I wasn't going to be erased by a lie about my mental state. And I sure wasn't going to be erased by a plan that ended with me silently disappearing. The front door opened. Varick stepped out onto the porch with his phone in hand, already filming again. His posture was loose, rehearsed, like he knew exactly how this scene was supposed to look. A car turned onto the street, headlights cutting through the mist. Varick lifted his voice, sweet, controlled, meant for anyone official within earshot. "Officer," he called out, "my stepdad's confused. He's been under a lot of stress." And that's when I understood. Varick wasn't trying to hurt me in secret anymore. He was trying to make sure nobody believed me when I told the truth. Varick stood on the porch like he owned the night. Phone up, arm steady, face practiced. The first patrol car rolled in, lights washing the wet street blue and red. And he spoke before anyone even reached the steps. "My stepdad's confused," he said, loud enough for the officers and the camera. "He's been under stress." That sentence landed on me like a label slapped on a file folder. Not a question, not concern, a strategy. I kept my hands visible. I kept my voice level. I didn't chase his words. I chased the one thing that mattered. "I want the glass documented," I said. One of the officers glanced at the phone in Varick's hand. Another looked at me, then toward the living room where paramedics were moving in quick, controlled steps. The house smelled like wine and pine cleaner, and something sharp I couldn't name. "Sir," the EMS lead said, "we're working on your wife. Are you her husband?" "Yes." Varick shifted, like the word husband bothered him. I stepped slightly to the side, staying in the porch light. "I'm not here to fight," I told them. "I'm asking for procedure. That glass needs to be handled properly." A man in a dark jacket came up the walk behind the officers, calm, unhurried, eyes taking everything in without making a show of it. He introduced himself with a small nod. "Detective Theron," he said. "I'm going to ask a few questions. Keep it simple. Keep it honest." I appreciated that. At my age, you can tell when someone is looking for truth instead of drama. Inside, I pointed to the counter without stepping fully into the room. Evangeline's phone was there, face down. Her purse was half open. Everything looked normal, which made it worse. "My wife keeps notes," I said carefully, "about my health, my stress reactions, my medication. She started writing them down months ago." Theron didn't flinch. Why would she do that? I chose my words the way I choose a tool at work. Nothing extra, nothing sloppy. "Because if you label a man unstable," I said, "people stop listening when he tells the truth." Varick made a small sound, like a laugh he tried to swallow. "See, he's doing it again. He thinks everything is a conspiracy." I ignored him and kept my eyes on Theron. "Earlier tonight," I added, "she said something in front of everyone. She said it sweet, like she was caring, loud enough for the room to hear. Theron's gaze stayed steady. What did she say? I felt the sting of it all over again, not because it hurt my pride, but because it showed me what my marriage had become. "Remember your meds, honey," I said. The words looked harmless on paper, but I heard her tone in my head, soft, patient, almost loving. And I remembered her eyes. They weren't soft at all. It was a public reminder designed to sound kind and make me look fragile. A perfect little performance. If I reacted, I'd prove her point. If I stayed quiet, the story stood. Theron glanced toward Varric, then toward the tripod inside the dining room, still facing the table like the night was meant to be content. "Were you recording this dinner?" he asked me quietly. "They were," I said. The whole thing felt like it was for an audience. Varric lifted his chin. "It's just a family video. People do that." Theron didn't respond to him. That told me more than any speech could. I drew a line without raising my voice. "Detective," I said, "if something happens to me after tonight, I want it on record that I reported suspicion of foul play. I want a report number. I want that glass tagged. I want it clear that I asked for this." The porch light flickered once, as if the house itself was nervous. Theron nodded. "That's reasonable." He gave me the number. I wrote it on my palm with the same pen I'd used on the receipt, pressing hard enough that it would stay. I wasn't going to let it vanish into the chaos. Behind us, Evangeline's voice floated from inside, thin, shaky, confused. She was sitting up now, wrapped in a blanket, cheeks pale. A paramedic was checking her vitals. Theron asked her a question. "Ma'am, did you see anything placed in the drinks?" Evangeline's eyes darted past the paramedic, past the detective, past me. They landed on her son first. "He didn't mean anything," she whispered. "Varric wouldn't. He's a good boy." Even after everything, even with her body betraying whatever plan had been set in motion, her reflex was to protect him. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. That's what they wanted. A scene, a headline, a reason to call me unstable again. The EMS lead stepped out and lowered his voice to mine. "Your wife's vitals stabilized," he said, "but this doesn't look like a simple fainting spell." That sentence drained the last bit of denial out of me. If the glass had been meant for me, the plan was real. I looked at Varric. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw something behind the mask. Fear. Quick. Controlled. But there. The ambulance doors closed with a heavy thud. As they wheeled Evangeline out, her purse tipped, and a white envelope slid onto the counter near the keys. FedEx. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. I read the bold print on the label, and my throat went dry. The ambulance pulled away, and the neighborhood went quiet in that strange, hollow way it does after chaos leaves. The flashing lights disappeared down the wet street, and all that was left was the porch light buzzing overhead and the sound of my own breathing. I walked back inside like a man stepping into a house that no longer belonged to him. The dining room looked untouched in the worst way, plates half finished, napkins crumpled, the ring light still glowing faintly like a small sun aimed at the table. The tripod stood there, stubborn and patient, as if it expected the show to continue. And on the kitchen counter, exactly where it had slid out, was the FedEx envelope. I didn't rush for it. I didn't tear it open like a desperate man. I just stared at it, the way you stare at a snake you almost stepped on. Evangeline's name was printed cleanly across the label. Under it, in bold, official-looking text, I could see part of the subject line through the transparent window. Change of beneficiary. Renewal documents. My hands didn't shake wildly. They trembled just enough for me to notice. The kind of tremble you get when your body understands something your heart is still trying to deny. So that was the real dinner. Not family, not forgiveness, not a fresh start. Paperwork. I turned the envelope over slowly without opening it, checking the return address. A financial services office. Something with a downtown Seattle suite number. The kind of place that doesn't send mail unless money is involved. Behind me, I heard the soft scrape of a chair. Varric walked back in like he'd been waiting for the house to empty out. His phone was still in his hand. Of course it was. The camera was his shield, his weapon, his alibi. He aimed it toward me and switched on that warm, trembling tone he used when there were witnesses. "I'm just Trying to make sure everybody stays calm, he said, loud enough for the recording. He's stressed. He's not thinking straight. I didn't even look at the phone. I looked at him. That's what you want them to believe, I said quietly. He took a step closer, hovering near the edge of the kitchen like he was afraid to cross a line he couldn't uncross. His thumb floated near the screen like he was deciding whether to hit a button. You need to stop, he said, voice still sugary. You're making this worse. I set the envelope down exactly where it had been. I didn't clutch it. I didn't hide it. I let it sit there like a fact. Then my eyes drifted back to the dining table. The wine glass that had started it all was gone, taken for documentation like I asked. But the spot where it sat remained, a faint ring on the polished wood, like a marker left behind after a storm. That ring might as well have been a bullseye. I could see it now without replaying every second. The way the drink had been ready too early, the way Varric hovered around it like a guard, the way he'd smiled at the camera right after Evangeline collapsed, as if the world had handed him something he'd earned. And I remembered Evangeline's voice earlier, calm and sweet, saying my name like she was helping me. Remember your meds, honey. That wasn't care. That was insurance. A story built ahead of time so nobody would believe the man who survived. Varric's smile slipped, just a crack. Then he spoke lower, not for the camera. You don't get it, he said, and for the first time the mask wasn't fully on. You're in the way. The words hit harder than any insult because they were simple and honest. I nodded once. In the way of what? He hesitated. His eyes flicked to the envelope, then away like his mouth had already said too much. Mom's building a future, he muttered. A real one. You're just temporary. Temporary. Like I was a rental car. Like I was a paycheck. Like I was furniture that could be swapped out once it wasn't stylish anymore. I heard movement down the hall, someone shifting, maybe Evangeline's coat sliding off a chair, maybe the house settling. Varric's face softened instantly, performance returning. Please, he said louder, turning the phone slightly. Let's not do this tonight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step toward him. I didn't give him the scene he wanted. I simply said, if anything happens to me after tonight, this envelope and that glass will be the first things they look at. His eyes sharpened. I already have a report number, I continued. I already made a call, and I'm done playing along. For a moment, the air between us felt thin, like one wrong word would shatter it. Varric's confidence wavered. He wasn't used to me speaking like a man who had options. Then, slowly, I slid a finger under the flap of the FedEx envelope, just enough to see the header inside. I didn't pull everything out. I didn't need to. My name was printed there, not as her husband, as a problem being removed. The words were clean, legal, and cold, the kind of language that erases you without ever raising its voice. I stared at that paper, and something inside me settled into place. This wasn't only about my stepson's hatred. This was about a decision, signed in ink. Seeing my name on that paperwork didn't make me shout. It made me careful. I photographed everything. The FedEx label, the date, the header about changing beneficiaries. No speeches, just proof. Then I sealed the envelope and slid it into my jacket like it could keep me alive. Varric lingered with his phone aimed my way. You're spiraling, he said, in that smooth voice that sounds caring on camera. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. At the hospital, Evangeline lay under fluorescent lights, pale but awake. I expected fear, relief, anything that sounded like, thank God you're here. Instead, she whispered, did you tell them about Kyle? My wife collapsed after drinking from a glass your son tampered with, I said. Yes, I told them. Her eyes tightened. Gideon, why would you do that? You're ruining us. Us? I kept my voice low. You almost died. She swallowed, then said the line I'd heard too many times. Only this time it sounded like a weapon. Stop being paranoid. Please, you're making this worse. Paranoid. A clean little word that turns a man into a problem and turns everyone else into victims of his stress. In that moment, I understood the trap. If I stayed close, they could paint me unstable and rewrite tonight into something harmless. I walked out before my emotions could do something stupid. In my truck, I opened my notes app and titled it Timeline for Investigator. I wrote it like a work order. Pre-poured glass, powder, switch, Varric's split-second panic, Evangeline collapsing, the beneficiary papers waiting on the counter. I called Merrick. He didn't dramatize. He asked me what I documented. "They're building a story," he said. "You build proof, and you don't go back in that house alone." So I made my first real move, quiet, permanent. I changed passwords, removed shared access, froze anything at the bank that could be moved without my signature. Then I called the non-emergency line again and added the envelope to the report, calm and clear. A little after 2 in the morning, my phone rang. Detective Theron's voice was steady. "Mr. Hale," he said, "did anyone else drink from that glass before your wife did?" I sat up straight, because if Varick was willing to poison me, he might have been willing to poison anyone, or worse, make it look like I did. And that's when I knew the next step wasn't emotional. It was legal. I wasn't going to blink. I woke up stiff in my truck, the kind of cold that seeps through your bones and makes the steering wheel feel like metal from a freezer. My phone was on the passenger seat, lighting up every few seconds like it couldn't wait to hurt me. The first thing I saw wasn't a missed call from my wife. It was Varick's face, and a headline he'd written himself. "My mom collapsed. My stepdad's unstable." Thousands of views, hundreds of comments, strangers calling me dangerous, calling me a bully, calling me the reason a woman almost died. I scrolled until my thumbs started to shake, and there I was, cropped and edited into a villain, just like he'd done before. Months ago, he cropped me out of family photos. Now he was cropping the truth out of a medical emergency. He'd posted only the part where I asked for the glass to be documented. He cut out everything else. No powder, no switch, no reason, just my voice, firm and low, sounding angry to anyone who didn't know me. And Evangeline, she didn't correct it. Her silence sat there like a signature. I felt heat crawl up my neck, the kind that makes a man want to write something reckless. But I didn't. I'd seen what comment wars do. They don't prove innocence, they just feed the fire. So I watched, I listened, I treated it like evidence. That's when I heard it. I replayed the clip again, turning the volume up, leaning close like I was checking a bad furnace motor. Right at the moment my hands moved, when the glasses switched, Varick's voice cracked through the noise. "No, wait!" It was quick, almost buried. But it wasn't the voice of a grieving son. It was panic. My stomach went tight. Not because I was scared of him, because I realized he'd accidentally left the truth in his own lie. I saved the video instantly, screen recorded it, backed it up, sent it to Merrick and to myself by email before it could mysteriously vanish. Then I drove to a coffee shop as the sky turned gray, ordered something I barely tasted, and opened a folder on my phone. Evidence, timeline, screenshots, times, names, report number, the envelope, the clip with that 1-second mistake. I called the station and asked for Detective Theron. When he came on, I didn't sound emotional. I sounded like a man keeping records. "He's smearing me online," I said, and he left a statement in the video that shows intent. I have it saved. Then I sent a text I never thought I'd have to write. To Merrick, "If you don't hear from me by tonight, call Theron. I'm not safe." To Verity, "I need you to confirm what you saw last night. Just the truth." I typed, deleted, typed again. Every word chosen like it might be read in court. An hour later, Evangeline called. Her voice was tight and urgent. "Kyle's getting attacked online," she said. "People are saying he did something. Gideon, you have to stop this." I stared at the steam rising from my cup and felt something in me go quiet. "I'm done protecting lies," I said. She started to speak again, but I ended the call before my voice could break. Right then, the story disappeared. Deleted. And seconds later, a message came from an unknown number. "Stop, or you'll be sorry." I sat there, phone in my hand, and understood something simple. The moment I started collecting proof, someone finally got afraid. 2 days after the dinner, Tacoma looked like it had given up on light. Rain slid down the windshield in steady sheets, turning every street lamp into a soft blur. I was sitting in my truck outside a grocery store, staring at the wipers, when my phone rang. Evangeline's sister. Her voice was polite. Too polite. "We need to talk as a family," she said, like she was scheduling a meeting at a bank. Not, "How are you holding up?" Not, "Are you safe?" Just, "We need to talk." I said yes for one reason. because I knew the moment I refused, they'd use it as proof I was unstable. I texted Merrick the address, then sent Theron a short message. Family meeting today. Multiple witnesses. I'll keep it calm. I slid the evidence bag and printed screenshots into a plain manila folder, like a man packing tools for a job he didn't want, but had to finish. The house they chose wasn't ours. That mattered. Their ground. Their rules. When I walked in, I understood immediately it wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. There were extra chairs. Not just Evangeline and Varick. There was her aunt, her uncle, and a woman from church I'd seen smiling at potlucks. The chairs were arranged in a half circle like an intervention. One chair, mine, sat slightly apart, angled like a spotlight. Varick was already seated, calm as a man waiting for a verdict he believed he owned. His phone lay face down on the table, close enough to grab in one motion. Evangeline wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at her hands like she was trying to keep them from shaking. Then a man I'd never met leaned forward. Cassian, 58, church elder. The kind of person everyone listens to because he speaks softly and never raises his voice. "Gideon," he said, like he was delivering a prayer. "We're concerned. You're causing division. This isn't how a husband behaves." I felt heat rise, but I kept my tone steady. "I'm not causing division," I said. "I'm refusing to carry a lie." Cassian's eyes stayed gentle. "Forgiveness is important. Peace is important." I tapped my wedding ring against the table once. Just once. Forgiveness isn't permission to poison someone. The room went quiet in that heavy, uncomfortable way people get when truth shows up without an invitation. Varick tried to smile. "This is getting dramatic," he said. "He's obsessed." I opened my folder and didn't raise my voice. I laid out facts, not feelings. The odd glass, the powder, the envelope, the report number, the screenshot of his deleted story. Then I slid one printed frame across the table. The moment he blurted, "No, wait!" Varick's mask cracked so fast it almost startled me. "That's not what that was," he snapped, louder than he meant to. Anger flashed across his face before he remembered the room. Cassian's expression shifted, just slightly, like a man realizing he'd been recruited as a weapon. Evangeline finally spoke. "Gideon, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Drop it. We can do counseling. We can fix this. Just stop." I looked at her, and what hurt wasn't her fear. It was who she was afraid of. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." I stood up slowly. No shouting, no scene, just final. "I'm separating," I told her. "I'm getting legal counsel, and I will never meet with Varick in private again." Then I reached into my pocket and placed something on the table. That little place card from the dinner. The one that said, "Guest." I left it there like a receipt. As I walked toward the door, Varick leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You'll lose everything," he whispered. I turned back once, and Evangeline didn't deny it. She just stared at the floor. That's when I understood they weren't trying to calm this down. They were getting ready to take from me. I barely reached my truck before my phone chimed. Sharp. Official. A bank alert. New account change detected. Then, credit inquiry pending. I opened the details under a streetlight and felt my stomach twist. Numbers moved that I hadn't moved. A request in my name that I hadn't made. It was the fear of paperwork, of losing your home and spending years proving you didn't do what someone did with your identity. I locked everything I could from the app. Freeze cards, block transfers, then called the credit union's emergency line. When the woman answered, I kept my voice even. "My name is Gideon Hale. Something is being opened in my name. I didn't authorize it. I need it documented and locked down. I'm flagging it right now," she said. "Come in first thing tomorrow. I'll be there when you unlock the doors," I told her. I slept in my truck in the parking lot, waking up to every buzz. By dawn, the windows were fogged from my breath. When the lobby finally opened, I walked inside like a man heading into court. A fraud specialist named Marcy brought me into a small office and turned her screen toward me. "There was an attempted authorization change," she said, "and a credit inquiry tied to your social. It didn't fully complete, but we have to open a fraud case." On the screen, I saw my name beside words that made my throat go dry. Authorized party, guarantor. Below it was a signature that looked like mine if you only glanced. But it wasn't mine. Marcy asked, "Who has access to your personal information?" The truth tasted like metal. My wife, I said, and her son. She slid a form across the desk. If you sign this, we investigate. That can lead to charges. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Not because I doubted, but because I knew what it meant. Evangeline would call it betrayal. They would call it going too far. Then I thought about the powder in the glass, the envelope on the counter, the way they arranged chairs like I was the problem. I took the pen. My name is not a resource you get to spend, I said, and I signed. Back in my truck, an old voicemail came to mind. One I'd saved months ago after I paid another temporary bill. Varick's voice had been casual, entitled. "You'll handle it," he'd said. "You always do." I forwarded it to Merrick, then to Detective Theron. Pattern matters. I called Evangeline last. "Why is my name on this?" I asked, quiet and flat. Silence. Then, "I didn't have a choice. Kyle needed it." "You had a choice," I said. "You chose him, and you used my life to do it." "Please," she whispered. "Fix it quietly. Don't ruin us." That's when it clicked. Paperwork was the long road. Poison was the shortcut. If I was gone, the forms would glide through, and grief would cover the trail. "I'm not fixing your lie," I said. "I'm stopping it." I ended the call. As I started the engine, a text lit up my screen from Varick. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just drove, because retaliation was coming, and for the first time, I wasn't walking into it blind. Theron called just after sunrise. I was in my truck outside a hardware store, trying to breathe like everything hadn't changed. "Gideon," he said, careful, like the next sentence could crack concrete. "We have results." My grip tightened around the phone. In my head, I heard Evangeline's old line. "Stop being paranoid," like a warning I should have taken seriously. Theron didn't drag it out. The lab confirmed the drink was tampered with. It's consistent with a toxic agent. It wasn't accidental. For a beat, I couldn't speak. Not because I felt proud, because I felt sick. The plan was real, and my wife had nearly paid for it because I tried to survive it. At the station, Theron slid a report summary across the table. Plain words, no drama, just facts that didn't care who cried. "This pattern," he said, tapping the page, "points to deliberate introduction. Someone wanted that glass to do harm." I stared at the paper like it was an obituary for my marriage. Then the system started moving. Theron explained the fraud case didn't sit alone anymore. "Motive," he said. "Pattern. Opportunity. Your evidence connects it." I handed him what I'd built, quietly, neatly. The clip where Varick blurted, "No, wait." Screenshots of the smear post. Photos of the FedEx documents. The old voicemail that treated me like an ATM. I didn't rant. I didn't beg. I just slid a labeled folder across the table. Later, Merrick met me for coffee at a little place where the waitress called everyone Hun. He nodded at my folder like it was a shield. "This is quiet revenge," he told me. "You don't fight their story, you build proof." So I did. I booked an attorney consult. I confirmed every freeze and password change. I filed for separation. Walls went up, not out of spite, but out of survival. That afternoon, Theron replayed the clip in front of another investigator and paused on Varick's face right when he realized the glasses had switched. The room went still. Proof has weight. Evangeline called that night. Her voice shook. "They said it wasn't an accident," she whispered. "I asked you to see me before the system had to," I said. "I'm not your enemy, but I'm not your cover anymore." When I got home, I set our wedding photo face down on the dresser. Not with anger, with closure. A knock came at the door. Through the window, I saw law enforcement on my porch. They weren't there for me. I opened the door and stepped back, letting the officers into the entryway like I was letting winter air into the house. Theron stood behind them, calm as ever. No raised voices, no dramatic speeches, just a folder in his hand and the weight of consequences in his eyes. One officer asked for Varick. Varick came down the hallway with that same practiced face he'd worn for the camera. He held his phone like it was part of his body. It kept buzzing in his pocket, lighting up the fabric with every notification. The officer read the words slowly. Rights, procedures, next steps. Varick's jaw tightened with each sentence, like he was trying to swallow the fact that the script wasn't his anymore. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just looked at me like I'd stolen something from him. And I realized something I didn't expect to feel. Relief. Not joy. Not victory, just relief, like the sound of control leaving a man's body is mostly silence. Evangeline called before the patrol car even turned the corner. Her voice came through in pieces. Gideon, I never thought he'd go that far. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the same counter where the FedEx envelope had sat, like the wood still remembered what it witnessed. You didn't think he'd go that far, I said quietly, because you trained him to believe he could. There was a long pause, the kind that isn't about thinking, the kind that's about realizing you've been lying to yourself for a long time. She started crying then, not the controlled kind, not the one meant to keep peace. This was the sound of a woman finally watching her denial collapse. 2 hours later, I was at the courthouse for paperwork and preliminary procedures. Nothing glamorous. Fluorescent lights, hard benches, people moving with coffee cups and tired faces. Theron kept it simple. He referenced the evidence like it was a wall no one could climb over. The clip mattered. The moment Varick blurted, "No, wait!" The timeline mattered. The envelope dates, the fraud forms. The pieces fit together so cleanly, it was almost embarrassing that anyone had called me unstable. Outside, my phone started chiming. A man from church messaged, "I'm sorry, I believed the post." A neighbor wrote, "I should have asked you first." Someone I didn't recognize sent, "I was wrong about you." I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt tired. Because being clear doesn't give you back the nights you spent in your truck, wondering if you'd live to see the morning. This is why you document, I thought. The internet is loud, but paper doesn't care about popularity. Merrick met me afterward and walked beside me to my truck like he was escorting me out of a storm. "They'll try to pull you back with guilt," he warned. "Don't let grief become a leash." That afternoon, I deleted the angry messages I'd typed and never sent. I replaced them with one line and saved it in my phone like a prayer. "Please communicate through my attorney." That was the difference between surviving and becoming cruel. Evangeline asked to see me in person, so I agreed, outside a small law office where every word could be witnessed. She stood under the awning, holding her car keys like they were a lifeline. "I was scared," she said. "I didn't want to lose my son." "You already lost your husband," I told her, steady and plain, "the moment you chose silence over truth." Her face crumpled. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then closed it, because there was nothing honest left to say. I slid my wedding ring off slowly. Not dramatic, not angry, just final. "No shared finances," I said. "No access. No contact without counsel." She nodded like her body understood what her heart couldn't accept. Late afternoon, Verity stopped by my place with a paper bag from the diner and a small thermos of coffee. She didn't ask for details. She didn't offer advice like she was running a meeting. She just set the food on my counter and left a note beside it in her shaky handwriting. "Eat something. Call me if you need." I stared at that note longer than I should have, because it reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Not all love is transactional. That evening, Theron called again. "Gideon," he said, "the beneficiary change and fraud documents weren't the only ones. We're seeing signs of a broader financial plan." My stomach tightened. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted everything I built while I was still breathing. I looked around my home, my tools, my coat on the chair, the quiet I'd fought so hard to earn. And I understood something with absolute clarity. The morning I walked into court, Tacoma winter hit my face. Cold, honest, and sharp. I didn't dress like I was going to war. I dressed like I was going to work. Button jacket, clean shirt, no ring. Outside the courthouse, Merrick met me on the steps and handed me a coffee. "Don't speak from pain," he said. "Speak from proof." Inside, it was a room, a judge benches, and a clock that didn't care. Theron laid out the facts like he was reading the weather. Chain of custody, lab confirmation, the toxic agent in the glass, and the clear signs of tampering. Marcy from the credit union spoke next, calm as a nurse. She explained the forged signature, the beneficiary changes, and the timing that tried to trap my name inside paperwork I never agreed to. When they asked me to place my evidence folder on the stand, I set it down gently. It wasn't sacred, it was just true. Then the clip was played. A phone speaker crackled, my own voice in the background. And then Varick, fast, sharp, panicked. "No, wait!" The room went silent. Cassian sat near the back, the elder who once told me I was causing division. His shoulders lowered like a man hearing the truth he can't argue with. Evangeline covered her mouth, eyes wet, like she was finally seeing the son she'd protected with denial. Varric tried to sit taller, tried to shape his face into innocence, but the sound had already done its work. You can't explain away panic when it's captured in your own voice. And that's when I understood the full motive. I was never the target in their story. I was the obstacle, the locked door between them and everything I'd built. If I disappeared, the paperwork moved cleanly. The money followed the names they chose. Grief would do the rest. The judge didn't announce a movie ending. He announced reality, charges moving forward, no contact orders, financial restrictions. Varric's phone was taken and sealed in a bag like the weapon it had always been. For the first time, the law protected me the way my marriage never did. Afterward, Evangeline stood outside, shaking. "I didn't think," she started. "I know," I said, but thinking wasn't enough. At my attorney's office, I signed the divorce filing the same day. No bargaining, no begging for peace. My signature, only mine. "You chose silence when it was safe," I told her. "I chose truth when it was costly." Someone called my name as I walked down the courthouse steps. I didn't turn around. That evening, I went home, made coffee, and sat by the window. Verity arrived with a simple dinner and no speeches, just warmth that didn't ask me to perform. I told her, mostly for myself, respect isn't love's reward, it's love's requirement. Later, I slid my evidence folder into a drawer and closed it gently. They tried to poison my body, but the real poison was how they treated my name. And that's the one thing they'll never touch again.